And welcome to another episode of Scotch and Watch, joined by my good friend and mucker, Chris Duncan. Hello, mate. I believe it may be your evening. What do you have in your hand?
Good evening, good evening, good evening from me and a lovely Bowmore 12-year-old.
Holding it up.
Mm.
It's first thing in the morning for me, but we're managing to cover three continents today. So we've got another special guest and a very special guest. I want to say hello this morning, this evening, and is it this afternoon for you, Sarah?
Yeah, it's about 4:30 in Toronto right now.
To Sarah Thompson in Toronto, where news is breaking today, which I believe Sarah may have been deeply involved in. So, for those of you joining Scotch and Watch for the first time, just ever so quick, I'll just set you up. This is where we talk about the collision of big media and big tech with a little bit of AI and some real life stories thrown in. It's unscripted, it's very honest, it's authentic, and it's by people actually in the industry talking about the things that affect the industry. And that is a really good reason to have Sarah along today. So, Sarah, I won't steal your thunder. Tell me why you're even more famous than usual today.
Um, because in Canada, we produced what I would say is the only example of how measuring to gross domestic product should be done in a country. The reason why this is really important across all media types is because of many of the things that you guys talk about, which is there's a lot more intermediaries between the advertiser's dollar and a publisher or a media owner. This is especially true in Canada. Canada is also one of the largest countries in the world that doesn't consume its own content. So we have a bit of like a cultural imperialism that's going on right now. The other side of that too is as we have, Online Streaming Act in Canada and Bill C-18 and all of our policies that have been in place, what we're kind of missing is who's controlling the pipes. So this study covers how many jobs are connected to this that fuel our gross domestic product. How many entities are dependent on those jobs in order to exist? How large are we comparatively to industries like the automotive industry, which nobody ever knew? And then how much are we actually bleeding out of our own economy based on this scenario? And the reason why this has never been done is because when you look at advertising associations and others, we like to complain or not, or take a lot of credit for every sale of everything that has ever happened in the universe. This is to get back to brass taxes of how many people actually retain their jobs and employment if we continue to invest in Canadian media, and how does that help our economy grow? And that's as simple as where the theory of this report came from.
I love that. So let me tell you a story. I was thinking about this just before I came on. So 20 years ago, Chris, this will be interesting to you. 20 years ago, there was a debate here in Australia where a politician, an ambitious young politician that wanted to be prime minister, decided that he was going to build a national broadband network. Okay. And it was going to cost 34 billion Australian dollars. And like it shook the nation that we were going to spend all this money. Stephen Conroy, his name was. But he was trying to build an internet connection that put Australia on the front line of having fast internet. So it would effectively plug us into a global economy. And I was on the advisory committee on that. And so the question I was asked was, what do you think? And everybody else was really buzzy and excited about the idea that we were going to have super fast internet, and everyone was going to pay attention to us, and no one was going to moan down the road that Mrs. Miggins, net didn't work anymore. That was going to be fine. We were going to fix that. And I said, my worry is that if we build a giant pipe onto the side of our country, okay, and then invite all of America's most aggressive and hungry tech companies to come into our country unfettered and unrestricted, they're going to suck a ton of our economy and our GDP down that pipe unless we have some rules in place to decide how we're going to limit or at least control that. Okay. It's great to be a part of the world, but if we're not match fit to compete with the world, when you plug it in, they'll just suck you dry. Now, that was 20 years ago, right? And here we are, we're seeing that, right? And it comes up a lot in the conversations we have, doesn't it, Chris?
Yeah, it does.
Are always talking about how our GDP or the GDPs of multiple nations are being sucked away, right?
Yep.
Here's the evidence. Here's the proof of it.
Right. And I love that. I love that. And it's coming at a time when we're starting to hear a lot of narrative about splinternets. I'm going to create my internet. You wait and see my new super internet. It's going to be my French internet or my Belgian internet or my Dutch internet. So people are getting very defensive, okay, which is not the World Wide Web. It's a completely different kind of web. And that becomes a bit of a concern. But we absolutely do, in the era of no control, have to control where the money is going. So, Sarah,
Mm-hmm.
there are some very big numbers in your report
Mm-hmm.
about, the amount of money effectively leaching out of Canada. So I think everybody in every country can take Canada as a proxy today. So let's
Mm.
hear what is actually happening to the Canadian economy when you have an open border for digital money, digital cash flow, effectively.
So the interesting thing about this report is that we can all look at sort of COVID as that moment in time for a lot of countries when we all really got hooked on platforms because we were in lockdowns, we were turning things on and off.
Mm.
And so ironically, what I would have loved in this report was to be able to do more historical analysis. The data is not clean enough for us to do every year of how we code jobs and do
Mm.
that. But what we can say is that we've lost about $7.5 billion from digital advertising is leaked out of our market. Now, the reverse can also be held true then. If a dollar in to a Canadian advertiser adds in a dollar to our gross domestic product, that also means we're extracting out of our market. Now, it all just requires just recalibration of in Canada, we are the population of California.
Mm.
That has to be always held true, which means we do not need Herculean tech solutions all the time in our market, but we like to adopt it, especially if you came from a holdco. We also have privacy restrictions. So it begs to me a few things of number one, the amount of jobs we've lost, tens of thousands of journalism jobs, which is cut back on our GDP, which is almost close to $2 billion, according to this report. We're losing money on funding our own content because we don't control the pipe. Then we start losing production jobs, content jobs, and we already don't consume enough of our Canadian stories in this country. So it becomes a sort of trickle down of impact overall. And I look at it and fast forward to this. My analogy to this, and if you're not Canadian, you might not understand this unless you understand this province, but I'm going to say it anyway because hopefully this analogy holds. If you have waterfront property in Prince Edward Island right now, you are probably eroding your beachfront at about 10 meters per year, right? So that erosion is not going to be felt until all of a sudden the ocean is at your back door. And that's the part that we're not paying attention to. It's like, yes, maybe we're not in complete crisis at this moment. But if we don't start mitigating, the crisis will exponentially get worse, which is why then we forecast out of all digital ad dollars based on this trajectory, how much of that stays in Canada? And we look at that as like 1%. And we're not replacing jobs with jobs. You lose journalists, you lose people at media agencies, you lose them on the sales side of media companies. We're not replacing them somewhere else in our economy. They just go. So it becomes a what we like to call is like an onion effect, which is how are we all interdependent in this? If you're working in out of home, if you're working in digital advertising, if you're a Canadian broadcaster, if you're working in content and production, you're at a media agency. We have an interdependency that's really important that we don't talk enough about. And this is because we look at the data in silos, because we don't really like to look across association boundaries. We all have our own agendas. This doesn't have an agenda except to say, if a dollar stays in Canada, that's a very good thing for our economy. The end.
So can I ask, Sarah, because we have similar challenges in the UK, it's similar associations, similar crossover, but we don't have
every country in the world except for the United States, it feels like an issue. But yeah,
has it? But we don't have a report like yours. So what prompted it? What sort of started this process for you?
When I was in between after leaving a holdco about a year ago, I was looking at incentivization programs around the world, like what countries are incentivizing advertisers to keep their dollars within their country. I was also looking at, because I've been a part of this conversation about digital ad dollars because of the work that I've done with the Canadian Media Directors Council and the Media Manifesto about retaining digital ad dollars in our market. Where are we sort of projecting? What's the trend line out of this? So when you give me idle time, I will sit on complicated problems.
Yeah.
And I produced a analysis of 65 countries that have some level of incentivization in content, in production, in a whole bunch of other areas, film and tax benefits. Nobody actually has formalized an approach to incentivizing local advertisers to invest in their local medium. That begged a question: why? Like, France has had something on the table for a while to support small, medium-sized businesses, but it hasn't seemed to take off. In Quebec, we have something too, but it's because no one has actually looked at the totality of the gross domestic product. We look at things where we talk purely about journalism, which I'm all for, like, yes, but it's going back to how the money flows from advertiser who needs to be in a quality media environment, and how we need to reestablish what that actually means, because we know about fraud made for advertising, siphoning less working dollars. What is happening in the supply chain? And then why can't we develop an advertising incentive program, knowing in Canada we've had Bill C-18, which is Meta censoring news, Google and the $100 million, which when you look at this report, doesn't seem like that much. And how do we actually start to stem the tide of this? And is there a possibility of looking at advertising incentive? But the problem is nobody's done a GDP calculation, right? Again, it's all silos. Or if you're looking at, I'm an advertising association, I'm going to prove that every dollar that an advertising media agency, creative agency does creates this much of economic value. And believe me, how I wish I could prove that out. But I wanted to go to brass taxes with Nordicity, who did this research of how many jobs, what are the salaries, who is dependent, how many jobs in Canada are dependent now on an ad dollar staying in Canada. And it's about 75,000 jobs that are counting on that. Our industry is bigger than the automotive industry, which has had massive incentivization in Canada, especially with the tariff war that we have currently with Trump. So when you look at the threats that even came down from Trump this week about, the legislation that we have of the DST, which we've revoked.
Yep.
Now we're getting all the money is flowing back to advertisers from Amazon and Google. We have to start looking at how the money flows. And now we know a dollar in is a dollar of value. $1 million creates jobs, creates $680,000 worth of salaries, and is $1 million to our GDP. So let's go and look at the money flow again, because we've been talking about platforms, but we're not talking about the advertisers who our job as media agencies is supposed to be the best interest of their money every single time. Not a reseller. We're supposed to be an agent.
Yes.
So this is where it all inevitably came from, because I can see the tide of principal trading happening. I can see what happens when Omnicom and IPG merge and what it does to a market like Canada. I've written about this a couple of times now. It sets price. It determines things. We start squeezing content. We have the Online Streaming Act in place. We have global deals with platforms on principal trading. This hurts us. So let's go back and talk about money flow. Where's the money going, and why isn't it going into Canada anymore?
All right. So let's talk about something else that begins with M, which is monopoly, right? So the interesting thing here is that I think that there was a real challenge for the DOJ to explain what monopoly really means to real people. There's been an argument for many years in antitrust law that says you have to prove a public harm. And of course, Google's response was, well, we don't cost anything, so what's the problem? Same thing with Meta. What's the problem? Well, the problem is there are downstream impacts and pain caused by when those companies become so large that they snuff out competition, but they also become the only pipe for money out of the country. To your point, Sarah, about what happens to the money when it's moving in one direction only. The tide is only going out. Eventually, the rocks are left exposed. So the interesting thing here is that if we had rules around digital services tax, then that would be fine, because that's what happens with global trade. Okay, that's worked forever and ever and ever. Only it doesn't work with digital companies. They just decide not to pay it, or they get the government, the US government, to threaten people not to have a digital services tax.
Or they passed it on to advertisers and media agents.
This is my point. And the money eventually flows downstream to those who can least afford it, because the ones that can take all the money take it away. And that's the important part here, is that monopoly feels abstract, but everyone feels it every single day. And this is where I think it literally comes home, is that eventually, and I hope it's going to be soon, and I think it's going to be soon, someone's going to walk into a politician's office and say, "Hi, boss, here's the thing. You promised me a hospital." And he's going to say, "We don't have the money anymore." And that voter is going to say, "Is that because we don't have a digital services tax for Google or Meta?" Eventually, with work like the work you're doing, Sarah, and the stuff that Chris and I are doing and others more and more are doing, that conversation is getting more and more close to a politician. And when a politician feels the pressure on them and they might not get elected, that's a different kind of pressure. But we have a severe cost of living crisis all over the world. We have a severe and centuries bad income disparity between the rich and the poor. Okay. And it's because of big tech, right? When's it going to land on real people? When are they going to get it, Sarah? And my real question is, when are the people who are giving them the ads going to wake up to the fact that this puts them out of a job at the holdcos and, with the advertisers?
Well, this has always been, to your last point, this is the thing that I'm watching right now sort of transpire in Canada as we see layoffs across the board, holdcos of really talented colleagues that no longer, have roles or places within our industry because they're gone. But it's an easy thing to play out. If all ad dollars are centralized on 4 or 5 different platforms, why is my job in Canada? Doesn't need to be in Canada. And then you connect that further and you go, okay, based on that, why does a marketer's job need to be in Canada? Because we're just flattening culture, because there's no content going through a Canadian pipe that is distributed properly where it's about a Canadian identity. But as you flatten culture outside of Quebec, which has all protections in place against language and culture, which is very wise, but you play that out, why does a marketer's job need to be here? So you're starting to see consolidation, especially if you're a global corporation that had headquarters. You're starting to see marketers whose title go from being, Canada, now all of a sudden they're North America, and we're being sucked into that, and Canada gets neglected. And the part to me that's always sort of done the disservice from a business as we work through that is that Canada, despite the fact that we are 40 million people, we're very large and resource heavy, the element of that is that there's such nuance, market by market and community by community, that often we overlook. And so we also then centralize dollars in urban centers, which then erodes the local media environment in a lot of other communities. That too is really concerning, because that's information integrity. We have fires just like every other country, it seems, right now. But if we don't have a radio station, if we don't have a newspaper, how do people know what to do? And this was a big thing when Meta censored the news, is how do people have access to it? I think if you start to play this out in your head, you can start to see what happens. And even if I could go into a programmatic or a digital campaign and audit a client and go, I can find you waste, I'm going to advocate for going back into Canadian media every single time, because it's higher attention, higher trust. People spend more time with it. It's a valued environment. Might be a little slightly higher CPM, but it'll also probably be a better customer for you who actually trusts you, and you're not lost in the wallpaper. So yeah, I mean, let's play it out. It's like the beach story. How far can this erosion go? Well, it can go all the way to your front door, and you don't have a job because we have offshored it to Argentina.
I think it's such an interesting thought that I know we've said for a long time. Local publishers would publish on their own sites and they'd publish on platforms. And then we said, but we've got to be careful because, a dollar that we get on our own site is a dollar, and a dollar that comes in over here, we get 30 cents or 3 cents or 2 cents, whatever. I don't think we've ever really framed it as actually when the same thing happens, the country is getting 3 cents on the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's most interesting about that report, and you mentioned the digital services tax. I think in the forecast, I had a quick look, did my homework before we came on here. I mean, I think Canada was forecasting 2025-26 to take $1 billion or $1.1 billion from that digital service tax. It was 3% of 40 billion or something like that. So $1 billion isn't going to your analogy, $1 billion is going to hold the sea back from Prince Edward Island for couple of weeks. It's not going to change the fortunes of the erosion. So I just think it's such an interesting way to look at the way that eventually, I guess it's a hollowing out, isn't it, of national media, national culture, local media, local culture,
100%,
and the ability to sustain it.
But you have to extend it into spaces like out of home, right? Now we have intermediaries between agency and out of home network in Canada. We have, radio in Canada is a really successful, efficient reach vehicle in our market. Doesn't get enough shout outs. When I look at one of the elements that I've always paid attention to is from staffing, because Canada has grown through immigration so much. That's also affected us on the media agency side. So we're rightfully or wrongly more likely to hire somebody new to Canada that has certifications in Google or TikTok or Meta. But can they find Canmore, Alberta on a map? And then we don't help them with that. So then you become kind of a hammer looking for a nail that you don't understand the country, the media environment, and media agencies in Canada and clients need to ask. How do you teach people about Canada? Because our population is not growing because of our birth rate. Our population's grown because of you're new to Canada. And there's nuance to that is really, really important. And if you've never been to, Charlottetown and PEI, you've never been to Quebec City, like you don't have a feel for the place. How can you really inform or make a decision about the media if you don't understand the environment? And this to me is where we're kind of at a crux of as well, is like the talent. We haven't helped the talent in that way. And it hasn't been, I've worked at a couple of holdcos. The training and development is required, but it requires a passionate leader who wants to teach people about media and the country and what works and what doesn't. And that discipline is not there as much as it needs to be for this to also change and to have a more strategic conversation with the client about the money that they're trying to invest to grow their business.
It's not the first time we've talked about a lack of leadership on all sides of the market because there's been a hollowing out, there's been a brain drain because it's been a tough period. But I do have some exceptionally good news because guess what, Chris, you have just been elected Prime Minister, which is really good news because now right, congrats. So now you have the ability to make some serious changes here. So it's very clearly understood what the problem is. And it's also very clear what the solutions are, right? So what would you do? Congratulations, please.
Thank you very much. This is so interesting. And you do have a new Prime Minister who understands this, I think, better than most in terms of how to go about, really starting to change the pressure that is coming through in trade deals. So we all know that in the last 6 months, or whatever, the kind of tariff has all been about goods. All of the revenue we've just talked about, all of the money that's coming out is in the services side, which has never been kind of addressed at the moment. All of the talk about imbalances that the US suffers terribly from is on the goods side. In most cases, they have a services surplus. And they've carefully kept those two things separate in order to enable kind of some of the, which we just call it activity. Let's call it activity. Some of the activity that's gone on in terms of setting kind of tariff levels. I think the kind of the non-US countries have to be more aligned, and I think this is happening to really start to say, well, hang on, if the future that the US wants is essentially, I think you described this beautifully earlier as cultural imperialism. It's a form of kind of colonization that says you are going to accept both our platforms and our standards and our kind of practices in media, and you're not going to tax it, you're not going to regulate it, and you're going to like it, and we're going to extract the money out of your economies. And we're never going to have that crossover to be thought of as a trade imbalance. That's not something that in the long term the 6 of the G7 can stomach. So I think that would be my first place to go, because any solution that you think about that says, okay, I'm going to protect the Canadian media industry, immediately lights go off in the Red Room in the White House that says, well, hang on a minute, you can't discriminate against American technology. Any time you say we're going to take a tax, or we're going to make sure that X% on the dollar goes into those industries, those red lights go off. So I think that's the place you'd have to start.
I think that's very wise.
I think it is very wise. I think too, the element of this conversation is, while we talk about the loss of this report, right? We talk about what is eroded. The other piece that is to still have optimism is we still have something there. We have great media organizations in Canada and great leaders who are innovating and collaborating and talking and trying to find new ways forward. I think that the part that needs to be pushed on a little bit more is not always just the woe is me, but the holy cow, we actually do collectively have economic impact on our country. And with that power, what are we going to do with it? Because we're just watching it kind of erode out the back instead of looking at it as still a weapon that we can yield.
Yeah.
And if you walk into a grocery store or anything in Canada, when you walk into an aisle, be it Loblaws or Sobeys or anybody, you will see a Canadian symbol next to Canadian products, right? The same thing has to be true of media. Are you reaching for Canadian media every single time? It's the same toe the line element of this decision, especially with advertisers.
There is the challenge, I suppose, is that to go into it is very difficult. So if you want to separate bourbon from bourbon, you can't do that unless it's written down. But if you want to separate out Canadian whiskey from American whiskey, it's pretty clear you're one or the other. I do think when we look about how we're going to navigate this next piece, if I'm a publisher, I am a publisher on my owned and operated sites, and I am a publisher in distributed media. And where I'm distributing that media, I am part of the, maybe it's involuntarily, but I'm part of the problem, because I'm providing the inventory that takes the ad money that extracts it from the economy. So I think that's going to be something that, as we watch some of these monopoly cases roll through, and as we start to kind of, I think as publishers get a bit more aggressive about saying, no, I really, really do have to protect owned and operated media. And that's true in all the different forms that you've talked about in the report. I think they're going to have to think a lot about how that distributed publishing works.
And I also think they have to think a lot about more collaboration. Historically, we've just had moments of misses, like right idea, wrong time. We've had it where we had Canadian publishers come together to try to create an offering of a marketplace in digital advertising. And it was just the wrong time because you have holdcos who are making their money off their trade desk. No appetite. We've just take too long from a self-serve function of a front-end interface where you look at the Canadian advertising industry is $26 billion by estimate. $8 billion of that is small and medium-sized business. We need a self-serve function for those businesses to be able to buy in our local economy. That's a given. But we need an appetite and a motivation to be able to do that, and leadership to want to see that possibility, because it can't just be one media partner. It has to be everybody. And then you also have to bring forward the other element of this, which is data. we are leaking data everywhere on who is Canada, where is Canada, and it's not staying in our own country. And we're a very hard country to measure. We're a very expensive country to measure. And we need more unified approaches to understanding Canadians so that we can all inevitably buy better too. And that requires unified approaches as well of at least maybe even a Canadian data marketplace. Like, we're leaking assets in a lot of different places. Let's start prioritizing where we make that stop.
Do you have any, are there any kind of Canadian tech platforms, entrepreneurs, products? Is there kind of innovation in Canadian owned tech that you can see? I mean, I say that from the UK perspective. I'm not suggesting the UK has that, by the way. I think we're probably.
Well, I mean, we're the home of like Share Through and Cohere, and like there are some Canadian ingenuity in pockets here that we are trying to export. But we always get growth when we leave our country in that vein. I think if ideally, we just have more collaboration. Like, I love the out-of-home industry in Canada. COMB has done a really good job of collectively, they've built a map of where all the out-of-home locations are in Canada so that you can access it. So I don't have to go through 14 platforms. I only have to go to one. These are important things for us to be able to redirect money, is to start democratizing and making this kind of information accessible so that when you're buying media, it's not siphoned through 14 different places from a data perspective that makes it so watered down. And it's a very hard question. I think everybody has innovation on their agenda, but again, we're 40 million people. We're a mighty country with a lot of natural resources and a lot of will and a very conservative bent and a socialist angle with a capitalism angle. And it's really one of these moments where it's like, how can we collectively make a roadmap and get the government on board with where we want to go as an industry? I was just talking with someone today about like content and film production, because they were asking about this report with that lens. And we talk about Canadian content and production and how much of that is tied to ad dollars. Well, like, so the world will go. We need to create more stories for ourselves too, but we need our broadcasters to do that for us too. But we then need to market well back to Canadians. So it all just becomes this loop of, we need a will to decide Canadian identity and our media ecosystem and our information and our news sector and all of these things really truly matter to us.
It does feel like as a population, you are sort of in a quite a unique position, aren't you? Because you literally have a land border, but you do have a very strong national identity, and we've all felt it in the last few months. As there's something quite beguiling about an angry Canadian. You don't
well, we voted with our wallets. We used to travel to New York. Our travel is non-existent to the United States. It's crashed across the board. American goods and services, pulling American whiskey off the shelf. Like, these measures are all incredibly important. It's funny. It's like we're very quiet, but we're not complacent. So there's definitely that undercurrent. If you drive down, the Gardiner Expressway in Toronto, you will probably see a lot of digital out-of-home boards that emphasize some sort of Canadian perspective of a Canadian product at least a dozen times. So those are the things we should be proud of, but we also need our wallets to extend further into information.
Okay. Can I roll some of this up into some big motherhood stuff that we can do? Because you've talked a little bit about PEI. I was in PEI a year ago. I was brought over by the Canadian government to talk to 90 local publisher groups who were all saying that they were being crushed by big tech and saying, what did we do wrong? And I said to them, you didn't do anything wrong. You had something wrong done to you. All right. And so you don't need to feel that you've done something wrong. You don't need to work harder to make Google be better for you. That's not your problem. That's not the problem you have. So I think we need to figure that out. I also had a really interesting conversation with one of the architects of Google's advertising business after the antitrust trial. Okay. And I interviewed him on a podcast. And I said to him, what do you think was what Google did wrong? And he said, we homogenized advertising. So it didn't matter whether it was good or bad. Okay. It was all just advertising, and we were able to sell it in one flavor. And that worked for agencies because it involved less work. And it worked for publishers because it didn't involve any work. And ultimately, the only one that really got paid was us, and the entire world fell for it. What I'm hearing now, though, is that what's actually happened with programmatic advertising is it has nationalized global advertising to America. We have outsourced all advertising globally to America. Advertising is American now, owned by those tech companies. And if you view it through that lens, it's no surprise that they're putting 70 cents on the dollar in their back pocket and not giving it to anybody else. So then we decided to do that. We allowed that to happen. The boiling frog scenario let that happen. And now we're realizing too late, because everybody thought it was a good way to save costs, or make their businesses a little bit easier. It was the path of least resistance. Yeah, no one got fired for doing programmatic. Right? I can't tell you the number of commercial directors at publishers who came to see me and said, fantastic, advertising's been solved. There's this programmatic thing, and all those ads we can't sell are now going to get sold. And then the terrifying phrase, and Ricky, the great thing is, any dollar is a good dollar. And I'm like, well, it isn't, though, because if it costs me $1.50 to get the dollar, that's a bad dollar. But not for the sales team that's KPI'd on revenue, not for the agency that's KPI'd on bookings. All right. And this whole thing has just fallen in a heap. So I've got a question for you. Why, Sarah, if sales taxes are too hard, okay, why don't we have a must carry for ads? Why don't we require a domestic advertiser domiciled for tax in Canada to spend a certain proportion, be required to spend a certain proportion of its ad spend on Canadian tax domiciled companies, and make that a legal requirement? And if you're a holdco, a share of the spend has to go to Canadian tax domiciled companies. It would have the same effect. Now, this already happens in South Korea, which is an economy that I'm about to go and visit and talk about. But the idea of a must carry for ads is a domestic law to Canadian owned and operated businesses. That's the first thing. Doesn't like the, what was it? What did you call it? The red button in the White House? It doesn't set off the red room. Yeah,
Definitely
DEFCON
does.
7.
Definitely does. Non-tariff barrier, discriminatory, railing against American technology. It's a disgrace. I'm dispatching people as we speak.
Right. Could that work, Sarah?
I mean, as not the public policy expert, but I will say one thing is I would reverse engineer that a little bit and focus on incentivizing advertisers versus making them pay another freight. The reason why is because what I would rather see is if you incentivize, then you're asking agencies to be more transparent about where ads are actually placed. You have to produce where those ads are actually appearing. And this is the dilemma, right? We can look at the data from 1,000 different ways. We can look at where the dollar is flowing in the US, but where are clients truly, from a transparency perspective, ads actually landing? And how much of that is in Canada? And we talk about made for advertising and fraud, but we are also not talking about like the exponential spill into things, or beyond even made for advertising, just, ISPs who are spoofing and creating content farms just to siphon revenue. We need to clean up the supply chain. And the advertiser has the power to make that happen if they're incentivized to put the money and ask for more evidence and get out of the contractual obligations that are currently like, you will get this. Don't ever ask us where your ads are run that are happening in contracts. That's 100% transparency. It is a client's dollar. We should be 100% honest of where that actually landed and to what audience and whether or not it was a human being. And we need to incentivize them. And now that we understand in Canada how the economic impact, right, the flow through, well, you build back jobs, you build back tax revenue, it pays itself back to our economy. You just need to, and you can't do a band-aid solution. It needs to be a big piece of legislation, a big policy shift for that to happen. But that also probably wouldn't flag to our friends south of the border of a pain point. You're changing it, because you also have to think that our country, while it's a Canadian business, we do have a lot of international businesses here, and we are dependent. So you don't want to keep hitting them with a stick. We want to incentivize them to keep putting money back into our economy.
I can see that. I can see that, as you say. Like, if it's a kind of a what we call in the UK a kite mark, so it's an ethical standard that says we are an advertiser who spends, X% of our money. We take these standards, we take these measures seriously. We spend this much money in local media. A voluntary kite mark that could be recognised by customers as, something that they would then appreciate. Again, that's not a non-tariff barrier. That's a voluntary code of conduct. That might be, Ricky. It's the same equivalent of a must carry, but it's more of a demonstration of kind of intent from the advertiser.
I'm a bit of a cynic on this. And
what?
Well, I'm sorry, I am, because best intentions rarely follow through to a wallow. I've sat in for 25 years, I've sat in so many well-meaning groups, where we've got a holdco, okay, and we've got 2 of their biggest clients, and I've got 6 of the editors and the chief revenue officers of publishers, and we've all sat around in a room and we've eaten crudité and done kumbaya and said we're going to do this, and 2 months later it's gone away. Yeah, Google's picked them up, taken them away to Mauritius for a training session, and everybody's come back with a suntan and no money again, right? So I don't think it works. I think that, everyone is complicit in causing this situation, all right? And the most complicit of all, I think, actually is the holdcos. I think the holdcos are taken by Google. I think they've been taken by Meta. I think they're owned by Google and Meta. The industry groups are funded by those organizations. And if they say that they are going to move a tiny dollar away, okay, from them, there's instantly a riposte. There's going to be some kind of fee that disappears, or some kind of incentive that disappears. Yeah.
Or some sponsorship that disappears.
Exactly that same thing, right? And I'll give you an example. There was a very, very large holdco that I won't name, but it would be one of the small handful that was about to do something with some of its advertisers and take away a deal with Google. And Google immediately cancelled their relationship with their existing holdco and moved to that holdco to stop them being able to do it, right? They suddenly became their biggest client, okay, which also meant you couldn't do anything about it. This is not going to change through goodwill. It's not. And it's not going to change through publishers or holding groups or advertisers doing the right thing, because they've forgotten what the right thing is. It has to be imposed, in my opinion.
In Canada, the Ontario government has mandated dollars actually stay within the publisher environment in Ontario. And one of the things that I think is really advantageous about this is that it's benefited a lot of our publishers. You should have more of an aperture opened up that more can access those dollars. But the campaigns are currently performing better too, from boots on the street. But nobody talks about these things. And that also is problematic, of finding brands and marketers who will say, when I did X, stopped investing in Meta or did something else, my campaign actually started performing. I was in more quality environments, because I've done studies with programmatic partners, everybody, that it's higher attention, higher quality, better results. Every single time. I've never not seen it perform. But we still end up in this space where a colleague of mine showed me a crack cocaine ad on Meta the other day. And I'm like, how is this even happening? we're forgetting the context of the environment. It's the same with our Canadian broadcasters. They can't just put an ad on TV. There's a process. They have to vet it. It can't just, there's a standard. And now we're just eroding the standards. And to me, from an advertiser perspective, that means everything that is around your ad is eroding too. And that makes your ad perform worse. And
But we
that
know
is
that
a big concern.
we know that if you give every person in the world a pen and ask them to write a newspaper, you end up with a worse newspaper. Quelle surprise. Why don't we give everybody a mobile phone camera and ask them to make the TV, right? So we know that that's true. And we've done that with advertising, right? And so we've given everybody the ability to place an ad, and there are 300 people in the chain who have various levels of expertise, and a lot of them virtually none, who are all charging a tiny clip of the ticket on massive volume, and they don't care where it goes. And we know that's true. So we clearly understand what the problem is. And the people that suffer most in this equation, based on your numbers and what we kind of already know in our hearts, is that publishers suffer. Okay. Advertisers suffer. Prices go up. Okay. Agency holdcos lose all their staff and their resources. Okay. These three things are an ecosystem, to your point, that you've just identified in your report, that worked very effectively and delivered $7 of value for every $1 spent for the GDP of Canada, right? And the only reason that ecosystem of those three things isn't working and let's throw in Canada's GDP as well into there, okay? So 4 major things. All of those things have changed, and the consumer gets a worse product, right? The fuck are we doing? This is easy to fix, right? It's easy to fix. Just don't let them do it. All right. So either mandate that they can't do it. Okay. Sure. Sarah, I bet you and I in 15 minutes could come up with 6 meaningful laws that could change this. Right. Number one, that's the first thing. The second thing is that fuck America. Right. They are, we're about to see Google antitrusted. Happy days. Get on with it, Mr. Judge. I'm still waiting. I'm fed up. Get on with it. Right. Then it's going to be Meta. Great, let's get after that, right? But we know what the answers are here. If the holdcos have the courage to give the middle finger to these tech companies, okay, then they can own their own economy within their environment, and they can make some proper money, and they can rehire people, and they can start to show the value of the job that they do, instead of being a slave and a reseller for Google and Meta's products, right? So have some value. Charge your 20% and earn it. Let's do that. Okay, publishers, you've got the audience, you've got the content, you've got the opportunity, you've got the desire, you've got the need, damn it, right? There's absolutely every incentive there. And to your advertisers, right? Absolutely, let's build national pride. We should. But I don't think they're just going to fall into line because they listen to to people in the ecosystem that tell them something else. They've got somebody from Google on the phone over here and somebody from an agency on the phone over here. And these people are busily trying to sell, supermarket trolleys, right? They don't have enough time to sit and do that. We're supposed to provide that service for them. The entire ecosystem has fallen in a heap because of monopoly, under the weight of monopoly. And we have to stand it back up. And solving it's only 3 or 4 things. We just have to solve those.
I would also say, like, sitting in the advertiser's hand, it's a question of the procurement process that they currently have. Having worked on like large RFPs and asks for budgets where you're told this is how many staff against this much money, you're going to take the path of least resistance to maximize the most amount of margin. That's just what you do.
Yeah.
So you're going to make it up from a principal trading perspective to try to make your staff whole, unless the money is pulled directly out of the local economy and put into the bigger machine of whatever holdco it is, and you don't get to reinvest in your staff. But it should be in the advertiser's best interest to go, who are the strategists and planners that you have on my business who understand my business and understand media? And I would like to spend some time just talking to them. Because that also changes this paradigm of, if you want to have a transactional relationship with your media agency, then you're going to get what you're going to get. But if you actually want somebody who does the hard work and thinks about your business and where to grow, we need to reset this. And that's where you start to see the divide, right? Like, you have agencies that are leaning back into strategy and planning and the independents, and we're starting to see that in Canada. And then you have the holdcos that are ending up being resellers of media where it's just going to be automated. And I'm really curious about how that is going to divide. Like, do I eventually have to buy media through them? Like, I'm so concerned about this. But the advertisers, it's still their money. It's their money. And I would like a tenure of a CMO to be not 2 minutes. I want them to have long careers and be successful, but we're not at the point where somebody's going, hey, how come my business isn't growing at market rate? How come when the pie gets bigger, I don't get more of the pie? I'm like, because we're advertising in places that no one sees.
Have you seen the WPP AI demo?
Mm-hmm.
It's, I mean, it's, so I do think we have to be, this is going to have to be a partnership between big media, big agency, big client. Because I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say, from an SME perspective, that's something that I think both Meta and Google have done brilliantly in terms of the service they provide. Whether you can have views on the efficiency and the efficacy of the advertising, but in terms of the ease with which mom and pop stores can advertise on big platforms, I don't think, if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of media has done that in as coherent a way. So
no, they haven't.
I think we have to probably focus early on at big clients who have big agency support, who actually have media planners and who think about these things deeply, and where the return on investment of better performing campaigns is meaningful. And if you can shift that part of the market, I think you can probably get to, SME and long tail stuff in the long run. But I don't think that's the first place I'd go.
It's also the things of how we think about media and the psychology of it. Like, there's so much in that needs to be retaught, but we also obsess about ROAS. And often when you have like a high ROAS, it's a customer I was going to get anyway. So it begs a conversation.
Yeah.
Like, we're guising it in metrics and thinking that that's going to sustain this for both our clients and for our own businesses especially in the agency world. But it hurts the publisher and the media owner because we're not chasing the right metric. And the other part of this is that I always go with is like brands in Canada who have a value of, I support communities. I'm about investing in communities. Well, here's an amazing fact out of our research. In-kind media donation. You get some from Google, you get nothing from Meta. Other platforms barely provide anything. For charities and organizations to be able to do fundraising in our country. But our broadcasters donate a lot of space that they can fundraise. So there is one element. In Canada, we have infrastructure because of our out-of-home industry that helps us lessen our municipal taxes and help us build public infrastructure. It's a cost benefit to our local ecosystem, but if they have less working dollars, that doesn't play out the same way. So it's wherever we have intermediaries that keep the money from going to the person who's actually the structure, the destination, is where we need to start really thinking about it of why do clients have less working dollars? Why is it the client gives $1 to an agency and comes at the other end with 40 cents in media activation to hyper target against no growth?
All right. Can I ask a question on that? Sorry to jump in, Chris, but again, I remain a little bit triggered on this, right? Why do we even need it? What is the actual real value they deliver? Sure, they make buying advertising a little bit easier, right? But if they're putting you out of a job and ending your economy, what's the point? So what, right? Why do we need them? If you just got rid of them tomorrow, would you still be able to have advertising?
100%. I think too, there's a conversation that my agency we have with media owners, which is part of the reason that the values alignment that I have with Classroom is really important, is because we can go and say, this is the dollar that we would be buying it. This is the dollar that is direct. We would rather work with you directly more often. Help us make this make sense. Because there's way more benefit in those conversations and we get way more value. I was talking with a media partner today and she's like, let's set up a meeting and sit and have a conversation about your ambitions, your clients' ambitions, and what we can do from a value creation. We spend more time with our sales reps at this agency and conversations because that's the groundwork that you have to do as an agency. We have to have the relationships with the Canadian media partners. I can't assume buy-throughs on every single thing I need to execute on. I can do direct insertions with Canadian media partners in OTT and connected TV. Let's do more of that, right? Less waste. It requires more effort, potentially more staffing, but are we not in the age of AI? Isn't this supposed to be like...
Well, that's what we want, more staff. We want more effort and more staffing. So it keeps the economy rolling. It's okay to do some work.
I don't want to be a robo advisor of an agency. I think that's diminishing returns for everybody. I want to be high net worth advisor to my clients. That's the job. That's what I always thought the job was.
But we've talked about this too before, Rick, haven't we? That this is maybe one of the things that has to happen the next 12 to 18 months is investment in high value salespeople on both sides of that equation. It has to be high value salespeople from the publisher side, direct sales teams that can go and talk to clients, that can talk to agencies, that can explain, why there's a kind of an ethical investing approach that is not just a philanthropic, it's actually effective. And from the agency side, the same thing. That's a kind of a preemptive investment in resource. That may be an area where the government can support. They've done a good job in the UK on apprenticeships, but not on this kind of thing. I've never seen a government incentive scheme for advertising salespeople. That would be a novel first, but that's the area where I think that kind of commercial relationship between, again, big media, big client, big agency is an area that probably has been hollowed out too.
I also welcome to that point any client that wants to knock on our door, show me a media plan, show me all your media plans, show me some of your analytics, and I will show you where there is waste. And if you just lifted and shifted and put that waste into potentially maybe slightly more expensive media, the return would have been so much better. Versus I'm going to try everything and nothing works. I was explaining to a client just this week, I'm like, investing in Toronto with the dollars that you have is like dropping a grain of sand on a beach. Let's find something where people have actually moved, where there's a growth opportunity that the competition isn't seeing, which is probably incredibly local.
Yeah.
All three of the people that were at Google in very senior positions at DoubleClick, that as they created programmatic, have told me, including very senior people that gave evidence at the trial, have said to me, we know that what we did would have the outcome that it had, right? It's what it was for, okay? Programmatic was never intended to solve sell-through for clients, okay? It was intended for us to own the advertising industry because we're an advertising company. DoubleClick was an advertising company, and when that acquisition took place, Google became an advertising company. Which bit don't you get? Read the evidence, read the emails, right, that are now public. This is an event that is now in the open, all right? We don't need to wonder if it happened. You can bloody read about how it happened, right? And how it was architected and how it was intended and how it was executed and how successful it was and how their staff cheered and clapped and said that their product was more addictive than cocaine and broke the economics of supply and demand. And when you tried to leave, it was so impossible, it took an act of God. Those are all actual verbatim quotes from the released email. We know what happened. We know how to fix it. This should be easy. Everybody wins by fixing this. You just need to say to them, it's been a great 20 years. Thanks very much. Really enjoyed it. You've done very well of it. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to close the door and not talk to you ever again. This marriage is over. Right? What does it take to achieve that, Sarah?
I think in a local market, way more collaboration amongst media owners, and stop focusing on our Canadian media being a charity. This study proves that we're not a charity. We are an economic powerhouse that drives our economy, and we need to get our hands back on our steering wheel. But the other part too is that we need to talk about these. Like, there's no coverage of these topics in Canadian media. right? Like you have to seek it out in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times to cover the antitrust case. I know that I talked with Ariel at
Mm.
Check My Ads, and like she was the only reporter in that room. Um, the same as like the Competition Bureau case that's currently going in motion in Canada against Google. What are we talking about? Like it's not talked about enough so that people can truly understand it. And
Mm.
that part of the journalism needs to be pulled out as well. The one point that you make too about Google and sort of the monopoly and that it's an advertising product. I always appreciated when Mark Zuckerberg said like, 98% of their business is based on advertising, but he
Mm.
pays no attention to that business. What? What are we saying? Because if I was a marketer, I'd be like, what? That's
Mm.
the thing that makes you money and you don't pay attention to it should be concerning. And like these are factors that are at play of misinformation and disinformation as we've had legitimate news pulled from Meta in Canada, which is an experience unto itself that most people will not get to live in the world, hopefully. But when you live it in Canada, it's a little bit disarming because you can put up a fake ad that is completely disinformation quite easily in this market, and nobody knows
Mm.
what truth is anymore. So what can we do? I mean, collaboration, conversation, doing a study like this on your local economy. What are we losing? What is it costing us? These are people's livelihoods. These are people's careers. This is family. This is dollars of buying a house or a car or going grocery shopping. These
Mm.
are all basic things that what would we be doing otherwise?
I think it's really important that it's a completely different conversation than the one that we're kind of painted into, which is that we're pushing back on, modernity, or we're trying to force, the AI genie back into the bottle, or we just don't want to accept that there's a digital economy that's moved past traditional media. I think that's, this is. I think we do genuinely worry about the fact that if you lose your national cultural sovereignty, you have lost something that is more important than dollars moving across border. It's more important than trade dollars. And maybe that there is something in that conversation that as yet we haven't managed over the last 20 years to kind of educate the public in some ways about how digital ads work, or how monopoly works, or how content
Actually, I
moderation.
would correct that. I think we've tried. I think a lot of those campaigns are sponsored by TikTok.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We should.
So let's
By the way, it's not just the US taking money; it's China too. Just to be even-handed. But yeah, I think that changing the tone of that debate to being actually these are kind of weapons of economic imperialism is an interesting avenue to explore.
In Canada in the 80s, when I was growing up on the national broadcasters, we had a series of Canadian heritage ads. So if you are amongst the Gen X, like I am, you would remember these. The Canadian government ran an ad, and it was about a hippo in the fridge. And it basically was saying, like, challenge what you see on TV. Don't believe everything that you see. Don't believe everything you're watching on TV. And anybody who's watching this from Canada, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. We need to do more of that. We need to help our young people. We need to do more education of how this works. We need our government to pay more attention to how money is flowing. Yes, it's a business to business space and not a consumer protection issue. But inevitably, much like Rick's point, is like it does become a consumer protection issue really quickly. It just feels like it's a business to business problem, but it does start to bleed out in our culture and our livelihoods in a different way.
Sarah, you, me, and you, Chris, we all need to jump on a plane and we need to go to Seoul, South Korea. So I've been investigating this for some time. It's quite astonishing. South Korea is the petri dish for how to solve this, and it won. Okay. And Canada is probably the next country that needs to adopt this. So let me tell you a little bit about South Korea, and we can leave it here and maybe we then go and do this. But South Korea is a relatively small country that has a relatively strong economic output. Okay, has some very serious companies, Samsung, etc. But it also has a language that's only spoken there. Okay. And so it has a culture that it has to protect. And it's very easy to Americanize something like South Korea, right? But they want to protect their culture. They want to protect their language. They want to they're very proud of their culture. And so they knew that as soon as they plugged a giant pipe, that looks like a delicious whiskey you got me. As soon as they plugged a giant pipe into their country, it was going to suck away their culture, and America was going to flood in. Okay. You know, it was going to be like Guam, just completely demolished by American culture. And so what it did was it said, well, Google and Meta can't come here, right? We're not going to allow that to happen. And what we're going to do is we're going to give government grants to launch our own search engine and our own social media network. And when those search engines and those browser companies and those social media companies start, we're going to require them to have a must carry on a share of voice model for all media companies to give them all a chance to flourish. Okay. And when Google fought and when Meta fought, because they both wanted to be in those countries, the country, South Korea, stood up and said, no, we're not going to allow you in. And they said, but people want our advertising. Look at all your advertisers in your country. They're screaming for our advertising solutions. Okay. Oh my goodness. Samsung are all over us and demanding that you give us access to this because we're so efficient for them around the world. And the government, being very smart, said, okay, that's absolutely fine, but we'll be the ad agency for you. So we will decide how much money goes from Samsung to you, Google, and how much goes from Samsung to you, Meta. And as a result, Google only has 11% of the ad market there, which is a right-sized amount for an international company, and Meta's less than that. And Google only has 38 employees there. And as a result, 1,500 media companies launched in South Korea last year, and 90% of them will fail, but some of them will grow and flow and win. And South Korean culture is being protected. South Koreans are learning cutting edge advertising solutions. The government is ensuring that the money stays within South Korea's borders and recirculates for the benefit of South Korea. It hasn't stopped Samsung being a successful business overseas at all. Okay?
Well,
Just
it's
hasn't.
also helped them. It also has helped them export their culture.
Right?
So they're not even just consuming their own, they're exporting it to other markets.
Yeah.
And so South Korea effectively created a splinternet or a nationalized protected internet that is still part of the world. All right? It feels like a thoroughly sensible model. If Australia had done that when I told them about the fears of sticking a pipe on the side of the country and exporting all their money to America's banking system, all right, or sorry, first of all, bouncing it through a low tax threshold country like Ireland and then taking it to America, right? Anybody ever heard of the fucking Panama Papers? Jesus Christ. So there is a way, there is a model that works. Okay. So as I keep saying, it's not like we don't understand what the problem is or what the solution is. The only thing we lack is the backbone to do it. Is that fair? Sorry, I'm raging again. But is it like that? That's the truth, though, isn't it?
I mean,
Everybody
there is something
wins
to
by
be
doing it.
saying. There is something to be said for being a little courageous right now, for sure. Agreed.
Well, let's do it.
I mean, I fundamentally don't want to see another colleague lose their job this year, but I know that we're in that window right now. So, yeah, I agree. We need better measures than what we currently have in place and way more collaboration.
Does it have to go to government?
Government has to provide government has to provide the protection for it to happen. So I don't think. I mean, there's a lot of debate. I mean, the UK at the moment, there's a lot of debate, and the government suddenly decided it was going to create an AI marketplace and run it. And to the kind of intense horror of anyone who's ever worked in the private sector, who said, please don't actually run it. But what we need is you need to provide the protection so that we can create a commercial market. And I think that's exactly what needs to happen all over the place. The governments, all they need to do is provide air cover for local markets to be able to fix the problems that they see now. They don't need to get involved in commercial solutions. They definitely don't want to be arbitraging media, or doing commercial deals. That's not what government does. Certainly the UK government cannot and should not attempt that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I think, a large capital project run by a government always will have overruns, always will, versus the protection that needs to be put in place so that the collaboration can happen to solve the problem. I agree with for sure.
All right.
Good conversation, guys.
Yeah.
Well, we need the publishing industry to collaborate collectively and become a bigger elephant, right? That's the first thing it needs to do. It needs to have some weight. We need to create commercial incentives for local advertisers to spend locally within their own economies. We need the publishers and the holdcos to collaborate collectively to their better outcomes by ensuring that they are trading directly and not necessarily using programmatic middlemen that are probably not required any longer. It might require more work, but it's higher yield and it keeps the money internally. That doesn't feel like a heavy lift. That feels like something that will happen.
Not as heavy as a hippo. It's not as heavy as a hippo in a fridge.
No, but it is as heavy as a bigger elephant. Yeah.
That's true.
There you go. So it's all about elephants and hippos. There we go. We've solved it. Fantastic. I knew we would get there eventually. Who would have thought? So amazing. Thanks so much for the chat. I really hope we can.
Can I give one more throw to this?
Sure.
As long as you like.
The campaign for Canadian media means business, which I think is just a clever line. We are trying to support NABS Canada, which supports employment and mental health services for those colleagues that have lost their jobs and need support now more than ever. Their demand is really high. So for anybody watching this, if you want a great tea or a piece of swag, we're doing a collab with them that has some great things from a Canadian perspective, French and English, because we are bilingual in this country. But all the dollars go to NABS to help all those colleagues that have lost their jobs and need employment support right now. And I think it's crucial. It was one of those things where I'm like, if the branding looks good on a tee, I will wear it. And you will see me at the World Media Congress at Madrid speaking on this topic on that stage as well. And I will be wearing that swag.
Amazing.
And you'll see me at the Online News Association in New Orleans talking about it in 10 days or so as well. And then you're going to see Chris and I in
at the same conference in Madrid. Yeah, but also
I will see you guys there. We'll have a drink.
Yeah,
we
can wear the 3 T-shirts on the plane to South Korea. Just sit in the middle 3.
I mean, nobody traveling the world ever went wrong with wearing something Canadian.
on their way to South Korea, right? I'm loving it. We're covering all the bases. Thanks so much for your work.
Thanks, guys.
I will send me the details and the links for that organization you were just talking about then, Sarah, and I'll make sure we post it within the podcast. I'll also publish all the data points from the survey, which was really detailed and really good. And thank you for throwing a punch, right? We have to start somewhere, if we don't, we go nowhere, and we're only got ourselves to blame. So thank you so much. Well done.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much.
Bye.
See you all later.
Bye.